again. Very nice. All right, let me just share the screen. And okay, well, as I said, it's just so nice to be with you. The memories of our recent time together in Hobart are still really fresh in our mind and still keeping us going. So good to see you again so soon. Well, this evening, what we want to do really is tell a story. It's a true story. It's somewhat of a sobering story. And yet, as I was learning about this story, I came to feel very privileged to know something about it. And I hope after this evening, you'll feel the same way. The reason that I've only come to know something of this story recently is that some of the sources and the archives which are relevant have only recently been codified in a book form by Brother Graham Jackman from the UK, who, as I understand it, has had contact for many years with brothers and sisters living in Germany. His book, as you can see there, is entitled As Dying and Behold We Live, the Merz Brothers and the Third Reich. So as you can probably imagine, Brother Graham's book is the main source for what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, but I've also been able to glean other bits and pieces from some of our magazines, and I've also been able to benefit from the research that Brother Peter Jolly from the Upper Gully congregation in Victoria has put into this topic. So he was looking at it a little bit before I was. Now, the events, really, that we're going to consider this evening took place some 80 to 90 years ago, probably before many, if not all of us perhaps, were born, say between the years of 1930 and 1941. And just bears thinking about it a little bit. It feels like a long time ago. Of course, we live in 2022. And I'm sure you've probably stopped to think about this, but it's 2022 because our Lord Jesus Christ was born 2022 years ago or thereabouts. It's a pretty good thing, isn't it? That our calendar dates time, as it were, and years from the beginning of his. And all through that 2000 years, his story, our Lord's story, has been being made known and it's been spread. And his call, if we think about it, has been echoing down through all of the years. And what is that call? It's a call that's been settling on all sorts of hearts and minds, getting the attention of people here and there, and perhaps you've heard his words too. Follow me. Follow me. Repent, for the kingdom is near. And really what we want to do this evening is just go back only a few years, really, if you think about it, in the big scheme of things, to meet some people who also heard the words of Jesus, as you and I have, follow me. And they needed to work out, as we do, what does that mean? In the context of the time and place in which I live, what does that mean? And so the story, as Brother Graham has it, is the story of the Merz brothers and the Third Reich. Now, the phrase the Third Reich, as many of you will probably know, means the third realm or the Third Empire. And this was the name that Adolf Hitler chose for his rule, because he wanted to put forth this idea that Nazi Germany was going to be the successor of the Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire was the First Reich, ruling from that period of 800 through to 1806, 1,000 years. And he wanted to put forth the idea that Nazi Germany was also the successor to the German Empire, 1871 to 1918, which he considered to be the Second Reich. And of course, the Third Reich was to last 1,000 years, according to the Nazi regime. On the September the 6th in 1934, it was reported that Adolf Hitler proclaimed the arrival of the Nazi millennium, predicting that the next 1,000 years would not witness another revolution in Germany. In reality, of course, with the gift of hindsight, we can see that the Nazi regime, the Third Reich, as it were, lasted for 12 traumatic years and came to an end with the crushing defeat of Germany in World War II in 1945. But our story really begins in this tiny little village of Klingesmühle near Kreilsheim. I'm not particularly good with my German, so I might get the pronunciation a bit wrong this evening. But this little village, I'm told, is about 118 kilometers northeast of Stuttgart. And this region of Germany is the region of Franconia. So it's heavily Catholic in terms of its religion. And there was a local mill here that was either owned or leased, we're not sure, by a man called Joseph Merz. And he and his wife, Philomena, appear to have settled there, and they began raising a large family, ending up with 10 sons and 3 daughters. And there on the right is that family home as it still looks today in the top right. And on the left is a glimpse of how it was all those years ago. This next photo contains 9 of the brothers. And our story this evening particularly concerns the 3 youngest brothers, Albert, who was born in 1911, August, who was born in 1913, and Rudolf, who was born in 1914. And we could probably hazard a guess at who the 3 youngest are of that lot, but I'm not exactly sure. And if you just think about those dates, many of you will recognize those dates as being on or just prior to the start of World War I. So if we think about that family living in that particular region during those years, it can't have been easy bringing up such a large family in those times, especially given the economic hardship that Germany experienced after World War I. And we don't know much really about their early lives other than this photo here, which it is thought was probably taken around about 1930. Shows them still, as you can see, they're all together, seemingly strong, seemingly healthy, and as I said, around about the year 1930. Now, the next thing that we learn in this story is that 3 of the brothers, that was Rudolf, Albert, and Joseph, went to work in Esslingen, which wasn't that far away, and they began work there at a flour mill. And this is where it gets very interesting, because the story is that one day one of the brothers, and it thought that it was actually Rudolf, saw a book floating in the mill stream, and he fished it out, and lo and behold, it was a Bible. And they dried it out and began to read it in earnest, which it seems as Catholics must have been a relatively new experience for them. And the interest that it aroused brought them into conversation with one of their work colleagues, which was a man by the name of Eugene Wiedemann. And during this period, the German ecclesia was not known as Christadelphian. They called themselves the Urchristen, which in reality literally means early Christians. The Urchristen, early Christians, idea being, of course, that their beliefs reflected that of early Christians. And their work colleague, Eugene Wiedemann, was an Urchristen from the congregation in Esslingen. And this was the beginning of the boys' contact, the three brothers' contact with the Christian ecclesias in Stuttgart. And as far as we can tell, this next photo here that you can see is from around about 1934, and it shows Albert, Brother Albert Merz on the left, around the age of 23, August at the age of 24, and then on the right there, you've got a photo of Brother Eugene Widemann and his fiancée. And as I said, it was around about this time that the brothers began to have more contact with the early, with the ecclesia there in Esslingen. And this is an early photo of the ecclesia, a photograph that was apparently taken in 1934 by a Brother Stanley Ramsden from the UK. And it shows Albert right there, circled, as you can see, in the midst. And then the ecclesia had the wonderful joy in around about 1935 of having a baptism, several baptisms, in fact, the baptisms of three of the Merz brothers on the same day, Julius, Rudolf, August, and Albert. Sorry, four of them were all baptized on the 17th of November, 1935. Of course, that's not a photo of that occasion. We can only imagine what it was really like and where it was. But it was nevertheless, no doubt, an occasion of great joy for the Esslingen ecclesia in that year. But I want you to think about this. Apparently, it was very much against the wishes of their Catholic parents that they took this step. But more than that, they're baptized in 1935. Now, you just think about that date, that year, and what I think it tells us about their baptisms is that it had to be the result of a deep conviction and commitment. Because what's happening in their world? Well, this man has been in power for 2 years. And apparently you didn't need to be hugely intelligent if you had been paying attention from about 1930 onwards to realize that when this man finally took the reins of power, when this man finally became chancellor in 1933, war was coming. There was a lot of people who saw that that was clearly what was in this man's heart. And by the time 1935 comes around, the year that these Merz brothers are baptized, the real rebuilding of the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe, that's the army and the air force, is in full swing. And because of recent laws that have been passed, it's now not enough for soldiers of the army to swear an oath of loyalty to the country. As of the 2nd of August in 1934, this is the oath that every soldier had to take personally. Military conscription is just around the corner, and everyone called up is going to have to take this oath. I swear by God, this holy oath, that I will render to Adolf Hitler, Führer of the German Reich and people, supreme commander of the armed forces, unconditional obedience, and that I am ready as a brave soldier to risk my life at any time for this oath. And that was a tremendous change which had actually taken place. It wasn't about allegiance to the country. It was allegiance to a man, to a personality. And really, the Nazification of Germany had begun in earnest by this point. The Nazis were busy now taking control of pretty much all aspects of German life. You've got Hitler youth groups and related activities springing up all over the country. The Gestapo, that's the secret police are ensuring that all movements, all organizations, whether they're cultural, whether they're political, whether they're religious, they're all being incorporated into the machinery of state in order to serve the Nazi agenda. And very, very soon, it's not going to be a case in Germany that people greet one another with Guten Tag, or say goodbye with Auf Wiedersehen or Salus. There's a massive campaign underway to have all those traditional greetings eliminated and replaced with two words, simply Heil Hitler, accompanied, of course, by the Nazi salute. That's how your butcher, that's how your grocer in Germany are going to say good morning. That's how people are going to say goodbye. That's how people are going to say good night. And of course, it's not just a greeting. It's not just words, is it? Every time you're greeted in that way, your allegiance, your loyalty to this man is being tested, because you are being called to respond in kind. You are being called to say, yes, my heart and my mind is one with that man. And of course, the youth all throughout Germany are especially being targeted. You can imagine the peer pressure of this. In the year 1936, just after the Merz brothers are baptized, the propaganda film Triumph of the Will was playing to packed theaters throughout Germany. Posters like this one are everywhere. The Nazi Party protects the people. Your fellow comrades need your advice and help. Join the local party organization. It doesn't matter what age you are, there's a part for you to play. Blockbuster films are coming out that are furthering the anti-Semitic agenda, creating the perfect conditions for the horror that we know was to come later. And what do you do if you're surrounded by this mood, this vibe in the country? What do you do if you're Christian? Well, if you're Catholic, you get right behind Hitler all the way. If your church is headed by the Vatican, well, the man next in line to be the Pope has visited Hitler and he's signed a treaty with him. He's the first foreign dignitary to do so. Vatican was the first state to officially recognize Nazi Germany. Catholic opposition was nullified from the get-go. Well, that's one big church. What do you do about the other 45 million or so Protestants? If you're the Nazi Party, if you're Hitler, what are you going to do about the Lutherans, the Reformed, the United Churches? Initially, it seemed that some of them wanted to oppose the Nazis and wanted to make sure that the church remained separate from politics. And yet others said, no, we've got to actively support Nazism. And they called themselves, some of them, the stormtroopers of Jesus Christ. And so the task began to bring all of German Protestantism in line with Nazi racial ideology. Instead of classifying people as Christians or Jews, German Christians began to classify people by racial heritage, just like the Nazis did. And by January of 1934, the leaders of this endeavor to bring all Protestant churches in line with Nazi ideology are vowing publicly to purge churches of all Jewish influence. That's what the Protestants are now doing. They are on board with the anti-Semitic agenda, and that includes removing the Old Testament from the Bible because it's based on the Hebrew Bible. Okay? And look at this. This is a public appeal released by German Christian leaders. The eternal God created for our nation a law that is peculiar to its own kind. It took shape in the leader, Adolf Hitler, and in the National Socialist state created by him. This law speaks to us from the history of our people. It's loyalty to this law which demands of us the battle for honor and freedom. One nation, one God, one Reich, one church. You see, it's a sick kind of parody of Ephesians, isn't it? In general, what happened was that Protestants in Germany found a way to be both believers in Christianity and supporters of Nazism. And you've even got this poster up there that you see of Luther with a swastika in the background. And those words in German mean Hitler's fight and Luther's teaching are the best defense for the German people. Very interesting study, actually, because you can show from some of his writings that Luther, obviously living and writing many centuries before Hitler, was an extreme anti-Semite and had already spoken of burning Jews in their homes. Okay, so there was many, many years of anti-Semitism there for Hitler to take hold of and use himself. Well, what about the Christen? What about the Christadelphians? Again, you can see the rivers all flowing in one direction all around them. And what do? Well, piecing together the bits and pieces from magazine articles, we find that the following was their experience. And it's amazing because it further tells us about the context in which the Merz brothers came to faith. We read about Brother Johannes, who told of his interrogation by the Gestapo in 1933 and how they had been under instruction not to hold public gatherings. We hear say of literature being confiscated in 1934. We hear about Brother Reich and Brother Bogner telling of the difficulties that they had in meeting together, and yet they tell of how they managed to outwit the persecutors by keeping within the law against the law against assemblies by organizing a memorial service which was staggered so that the legal maximum was never exceeded. So they had a sort of a rolling memorial meeting at different times to make sure that they kept within the law, but they still kept those meetings. Brother Bogner tells of being warned by a Gestapo officer of an impending raid and of hiding in the garden the entire stock of Christadelphian German literature, which was thus preserved for use after the war. And Sister Eva Bogner recalls going with her mother to Jewish homes in Ramscheid to warn them of the danger that the Nazis presented. And interestingly enough, in 1937, another baptism, Sister Emma Merz, who was the wife of Gregor Merz, one of the other Merz brothers, is recorded. So as late as 1937, another baptism. And I'll tell you something about that time period as well in a minute. But how's this for poignant? Speaking later, years after the war, Brother Karl Waldner stated that during this period, the constant exhortation was, whose are we going to be? Christ's or Hitler's? There can only be one answer. We are the richest people in the world. We have the greatest hope. Faith is very easy in good times. We must have faith in these exceedingly difficult times. So again, just think about this. The Merz brothers have joined a group that have been baptized into Christ in a group which is already being given negative attention from the Gestapo. They're already holding their meetings at night to dodge the authorities. And just imagine that. There's no option just to zoom in Okay. This is commitment, isn't it? And so what happened with these three brothers? Well, the first brother that we want to focus on was brother Rudolf Merz. Now, he was the youngest of the brothers, born in 1914, and the way it worked was that some of the youngest ones were called up first. So he was called up in 1936, and he was told to report to the army base on 4th of February 1937. And he refused to take the oath, would not take that oath that we read earlier. And he was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment in Rottenburg. We know nothing about what transpired in there, but we know that conscientious objectors were given no respect whatsoever. And in fact, he, at one point in his prison internment, was transferred to the psychiatric wing of the prison after showing signs of mental illness. He was released in 1938, and in 1940 he was called up again, and he's recorded as saying on that occasion, "I cannot serve two masters. I reaffirm my refusal to serve." And he was given a date to face court. He apparently suffered a mental health relapse and was once again committed to a psychiatric institution. There's actually a file on record in relation to Rudolf, and it says of him that he could never change the view that he had always held as an Christ, even if it were to cost him his life. The central tenet of the faith of the Christian was that the return of Christ would happen in the very near future. All members of this sect had to be guided strictly by the Bible. So, as I said, re-imprisoned in 1940, and he wasn't released, brothers and sisters, to 1950. And he apparently endured many years of mental suffering. And after his release, finally, he worked as a crane driver, never married, but he died in 2004 at the age of 90. Very quiet, apparently, very quiet, but very respected member of the Esslingen Ecclesia. Brother August Merz, we do have some documents that are still extant that relate to his case as well. It's believed that August was called up sometime in 1938 or very early on in 1939. And again, as I said, there's some records about August. It says of him, the accused, who has no criminal record, did not obey the command to report to the regiment in Weingarten and instead sent the order back. He had to be fetched from his home on the 6th of February 1939. We're also told that in the barracks, he repeatedly disobeyed the orders of his commanding officer, Captain Petzold, to put on an army uniform or to take the oath of loyalty to the Führer. And he states as his reasons that he is an Christ, and that this religious conviction forbids him to kill human beings, even in case of war, and that he cannot act contrary to this divine command, however severely he is punished. His brother Rudolf refused to obey on the same grounds. And it's believed that August went to trial, and yet he escaped the death penalty and was sent to what could arguably be thought of at the time to be something just as bad. He was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And in Sachsenhausen, the Bible students had to wear the purple triangle. That's what the symbol was. As you know, for the Jews, it was a Star of David. For Bible students, it was the purple triangle. And that was the phrase that the Nazis mostly used for Jehovah's Witnesses, Bible students. There was many Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany during that time. In fact, well over 1,000 Jehovah's Witnesses perished at the hands of the Nazis in World War II for their conscientious objection. And this is a photo of some of those prisoners in Sachsenhausen. And those records from Sachsenhausen, some of them are extant, and August Merz is found in one of those records, showing that from the 4th of March to the 15th of March, 1941, he was in the camp sickbay. We don't know the nature of his sickness, but it is interesting to note, as you'll see later, that we do know that round about this time, August would have heard some bad news about his brother Albert. Now, as you can probably imagine, the conditions in Sachsenhausen, like all of the concentration camps, was inhumane. Many thousands perished there through undernourishment, cold, disease, or just the brutality of the guard. The prisoners with the mauve triangle were amongst the most despised of the inmates, and they were subject to cruelty and bullying. In fact, it wasn't until the concentration camps began to get more of those yellow stars that you could argue that there were people finally who received more cruel treatment and focus than those with the mauve triangle. And we're told, and we don't know the circumstances as such, but we're told that Brother August came close to losing his life on a number of occasions. So he was there in the concentration camp until the 21st of April in 1945, with Western forces closing in. Sachsenhausen was one of the camps that was evacuated, and 33,000 inmates were marched towards the northwest of the country. And this is one of those notorious death marches. It's thought that Albert was subjected to this. The first groups to depart received minimal food rations, and those who departed later received no food at all. On the route, SS escort guards shot prisoners who were unable to keep up. The various groups that were marched out of Sachsenhausen became increasingly disorganized as the Allied troops neared. Eventually, the structure of the groups disintegrated, guards fled, and prisoners had more opportunities to separate from the main group and escape. And Brother August, it's believed, was in that group that escaped, and he eventually settled in a town right at the end of where that forced march terminated. And he lived there. And on a lovely little note, which I'm sure you will rejoice in some way to hear, Brother August married Ida Merz. And the story of the Merz family story is that Ida pushed food through the fence of the camp and kept August alive during that period. And it's thought that this was possible due to her having a work placement nearby. and Ida was baptized in 1949. And so we come to Brother Albert Merz. It's said that Albert used to read his Bible at work at the mill. And the family memories of Albert recall a young man who loved life and liked to sing. And he rode a motorbike, and he was always ready to help others. In fact, he was living with the family of his brother Gregor, who was away working in a munitions factory at the time. And he stayed with Gregor's wife, that's his sister-in-law, helping her with the children. And it was this woman, Emma Merz, that was baptized in 1937. So this little fact offers a tantalizing possibility, or the probability, that it had been Albert sharing his faith with Emma that resulted in her conversion, or certainly a part of that whole process. It's said that Albert had quite a few female admirers and could have married, but he chose not to, given the storm clouds which were certainly on the horizon by this stage. As we said earlier, his age group was yet to be called up, and by the time Albert was called up, there had been some setbacks in the war. In fact, the Nazi Party had introduced new laws that meant that if there had been any bend or any flex in relation to conscientious objection prior to 1940, there wasn't going to be now. And it was late 1940 when Albert was called up. He was arrested very quickly. And the family apparently suspected that the mayor of the small town in which he was living, who was a major Nazi sympathizer, played a part in orchestrating Albert's arrest, and he was transferred to Berlin, to a place called Tegel Prison. And this is where Albert was tried. In fact, this is the exact courtroom where Albert was tried and condemned. And there's no documentation from the trial that has survived, but there's a record later of the verdict and when it was given. And the date of the verdict was 21st of the 2nd, 1941. And it says the former rifleman, Albert Merz, was convicted by a verdict of the Supreme Military Court on the 21st of the 2nd of undermining military morale, and was sentenced to death, dishonorable discharge, and the loss of his rights as a citizen. Now, you'll notice that he's called the former rifleman. It's not that Albert ever served as a rifleman. It's just that if the Nazi Party calls you up and designates you a rifleman for the state, then that is what you are. And of course, Albert rejected this. Now, as I said, we don't have records from this trial, except for this verdict. But what we do have is a copy of a letter that Albert's Nazi-appointed lawyer wrote to him in the next day. All right. And that's the actual copy of the letter. That's in German. But let me read to you a translation of that letter from Eric Hone, who's the lawyer. And what it does do is it gives us an indication of the pressure that Albert was subjected to, and it also tells us what his defense was, really, in a couple of areas. So let me just read this to you and try to get the spirit of this. Imagine our brother reading this in his cell the next day. 22nd of February, 1941. Yesterday's proceedings ended with the death sentence being passed on you. No other outcome was possible because you remained deaf to all arguments. It went exactly as I told you it would at our meeting. You will have to concede yourself that the president of the court made every effort to cure you of your mistaken attitude. The more I reflect on your attitude, the more incomprehensible your conduct becomes to me. You will remember that the president read to you verbatim the passage in the Bible which says that every soul must be subject to the higher powers and that the powers that be are ordained by God. If you yourself always say that for you, as an Christ, only the Bible is authoritative, then you must recognize the force of this passage against you. You were unable to say a single word in reply to this passage. If the state authority, such as our Führer in this case, calls upon the German people to defend themselves in their struggle against the intended attacks of our envious neighbours, if necessary, with force of arms, and as the legitimate authority has introduced universal military service, then in the light of this passage, that is an order of which God approves too, and which every subject must obey. Everything is not yet lost for you. Although this grave sentence has been passed on you, the sentence can still be rescinded if, at the last minute, as it were, you will be convinced of the error of the position that you have adopted hitherto, and will declare that you are willing, without any conditions, to do military service. I hope that in the face of death, you will yet come to this wiser conclusion. Your standpoint, which you adopt so decidedly, without even considering the thoughts and arguments of your fellow countrymen, who are only seeking your good and who are good Christians too, is, in my view, not a defense of the original gospel, as you mistakenly think. In reality, your attitude comes rather from the spirit of Antichrist, inspired in you by the demon of sinful pride, as though only you and the few adherents of your erroneous beliefs had rightly understood the teaching of Jesus Christ, and all the rest of us offend against God's commandment. My firm opinion, anyway, shared by every true German, is that the good Lord will take greater pleasure in the man who has given his life in the fulfillment of his duty towards his fatherland than in someone who throws away his life pointlessly simply because out of pride he has refused to listen to those with greater wisdom. Such conduct can in no circumstances be pleasing to God. As your counsel, officially appointed by the court to defend you, I have considered it my duty to urge you to consider the matter one last time. Should you come to this more sensible conclusion, you must immediately ask to be brought before the court again and make a formal statement accordingly. The matter is very urgent, however, for you only have a few days in which to do so. Heil Hitler. Just want you to notice again what he says there. My firm opinion, shared by every true German, is that the good Lord will take greater pleasure in the man who has given his life in the fulfillment of his duty to the fatherland than in someone who throws away his life pointlessly. Well, we can only imagine how our brother endured his time considering such communications from his lawyer. And yet we can do more than imagine. We have a couple of Albert's letters. This one is the next day after receiving the letter from his lawyer. February the 23rd, 1941. My beloved all, I find it hard to write to you today, not for my own sake, but rather as I know that this letter will bring you much grief. So I beg you not to take it too hard. You know my faith and my hope. For me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So do not weep for me, even if the worst befalls me. But be strong and take courage. If I have been sentenced to death on the 21st of February and am to be executed, this simply means that the life which took on visible form in me will return to its source and will, at the appointed time again, assume this form. If my time now is at an end and I have to part, then remember that it is appointed unto men once to die, and after this, the judgment. Tomorrow I shall submit a petition for clemency. Perhaps the court may yet show mercy on me, and even if not, I still hope to be allowed to write you once more. Remember me in your prayers. And now I will close, trusting in God and his kingdom, and greet you with all my heart. Yours, Albert. Albert was transferred to Brandenburg prison, and his appeal for clemency rejected. On the 14th of March, his sentence was formally confirmed. And the reason he was then transferred to Brandenburg prison was because Brandenburg prison houses, or did then, an execution facility. And his execution date was set. It was set for the 4th of April in 1941. And you recall in his previous letter, he said he hoped that he would have the opportunity to write once more. Well, he did on April the 3rd, the day before his scheduled execution. My dear ones, I would like to use my last hours to write to you again, and at the same time to ask you not to take it too hard, for it is God's will. John 19:7, Romans 14:7-12, Romans 8, Isaiah 59. On Friday, the 4th of April at 5:30 in the morning, my time will be over and my struggle will be at an end. My last wish is that you may live in peace and ensure that none is lost. 2 Timothy. Oh, my dear friends, if only I could put on paper the 1,000 thoughts that I have been addressing to you in silent conversation and still am. But you can learn much from the Holy Scriptures, especially from the letters of the apostles, the farewell addresses of Jesus in John, etc. And I hope that I shall see you all again after my awakening. I will close now, and you will understand why I have not written more. It would be too much, and I send you my sincere greetings. Yours, Albert. Give my greetings to all the brothers and sisters and to those who think kindly of me. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen. And so on April the 4th, 1941 at 5:30 in the morning, Albert was led into this room in Brandenburg prison. This was the mode of death reserved exclusively for conscientious objections. And it's believed that from the moment he entered. It would have been no more than 12 seconds. Brother Albert's lawyer said that he was throwing away his life pointlessly. He says that there was no meaning in his death. But here's something interesting. On the back of Brother Albert's last letter, which we just read, he wrote a short poem. And it was a known poem, the sort that you could get on greetings cards and things. And it was called For the Wreath. And this is what he wrote. What you are, you must be with all your heart. Not only the bright flower, but also the plain leaf. It too belongs in the wreath. Only, do you know what? That's not what he wrote. That's the popular version, but in his writing of it, he changed the last line. I want you to think about this. Think about this. It's beautiful. This is what he changed it to. What you are, you must be with all your heart, not only the bright flower, but also the plain leaf. It too has meaning for the wreath. It has meaning for the wreath. I think that's extraordinary. And I think that this is not someone forgetting what that poem actually said. This is someone who had so much time to think, to ponder whether what his lawyer was saying was really true. And in effect, what he's doing by writing that is rejecting the idea that he's throwing away his life pointlessly. He's asserting that his death will have meaning. He's not claiming to be a blossom. At 30 years old, he's must have looked back on an oh so short, fast, unfulfilled life. He didn't get to blossom. But his consolation is that even the plain leaf, the plain life, lived faithfully, has meaning for the wreath. And what he was, a humble young follower of Christ with a simple choice, Jesus or Hitler, he was with all his heart and with all his life, really. There's a couple of verses which I've meditated on in relation to Brother Albert's life. First one is this one from Psalm 116, verse 15. A precious thing in Yahweh's sight is the death of those who die faithful to him. And noticed, didn't you, in his letters, how much resurrection was a core tenet of his faith. He was going to rise again. He believed that. And he was put to death, wasn't he, through the means that the Nazi party employed. He was put to death by this brutal, barbaric regime, which thought in its arrogance it was going to last 1,000 years and it would behead men like Brother Albert, people that they didn't realize they weren't worthy to have among them. And this is what makes this next quote so delicious in terms of its irony. Revelation 20 and verse 4. Then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge, and I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or on their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Our brother suffered that exact fate for his testimony to Jesus. And I believe that he's going to rise from the dead to have the Lord himself declare that his life was not pointless, and he's the one that's going to take part in a 1,000-year-long realm.